Tyson Bagent has already exceeded expectations as an undrafted rookie out of a Division II school. So the question from here is, just how good can he be? And where should we set expectations in a unique situation like this?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. On the show today, really excited to be talking to Matt Waldman of Matt Waldman's Rookie Scouting Portfolio. If you don't know Matt, he's a draft analyst who's been doing this for a long time and doing it better than almost everyone else. He only tends to focus on like the fantasy football positions in the NFL draft of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. But he goes in depth on all those positions and shows his work at an in-depth level beyond what anyone else is giving you in his draft guide every year. And Matt Waldman in particular was higher than anyone I've seen on Tyson Bagent heading into the draft. Before he was undrafted, before the Bears brought him in, throughout this whole process, he had Tyson Bagent, I believe, as his sixth highest graded quarterback in this year's draft class. He saw this potential throughout the process and is not as surprised then to see him play so well early on for the Bears. So we're going to talk to him about what Tyson Bagent was at the Division II level, why that's translating into the NFL, and where that kind of leads him from here. What we should watch for from Tyson Bagent, what we should expect for him moving forward. Matt is one of my favorite football people to talk to. When we have conversations with Matt Waldman on the podcast, I always learn something. I'm captivated by it every time, and I hope you are too. There's a lot to get into here. So, all right, we're joined now by the great Matt Waldman, author of Matt Waldman's Rookie Scouting Portfolio and a senior staff writer for Football Guys. You can see all his work at mattwaldmanrsp.com, including where he's done some great work on Tyson Bagent, a big part of his pre-draft analysis there of all the quarterbacks. And Bagent was a guy that you, Matt, were, I think, higher on than a lot of the people in the general consensus. And I think what we've seen from Bagent through a couple of starts now certainly rewards or lends some credence to some of what you were seeing from him early on in this process, ahead of the Senior Bowl, before the draft, before he goes undrafted. What would have been sort of your early impressions here through a couple of games?
Well, when I look at quarterbacks, especially once they've made their way to the NFL and during their rookie year, I'm really looking at them from a 30-game sample once they move into the NFL, and it's in phases. So this initial phase of 4 to 6 starts for me is, do they show a comfortable fit within the scheme that they have to play in? Like, is the scheme matching what they can do to a certain extent? And are they showing what they did in the college game in the NFL game? Pluses and minuses, strengths and weaknesses. Does he look like the same guy essentially, but just against, better athletes, savvier athletes and more complex schemes? And I'd say the answer right now is a resounding yes. He looks like that guy. And that's a big deal for him because he was a Division II quarterback. And you just never know because he's facing guys where sometimes the linebackers aren't as big as him in Division II. Sometimes that's the case. So you get a wider variety of athlete. And as a result of that, you can tell that he had arm strength. You can tell, and you see that in the game. I mean, he has no problem hitting those deep outs or perimeter throws that require putting, a line on the ball and throwing it with, low trajectory and velocity. He does that well. You can see that he's aggressive downfield when he sees opportunities, and does that extremely well up the boundary. That throw to Darnell Mooney at the beginning of the game was, a nice play. And you could see that he had that nice throw to Velus Jones Jr. that just, didn't work out. And so you see those opportunities with him. And then also the movement. He can throw to his left and to his right. The physical tools are all there. I think he sees the field reasonably well, especially when he is forced out of the pocket. He can create. And also there's a willingness to make some throws that you would expect a starter to make in the middle of the field, because that's really where NFL quarterbacks have to win, is between the hash marks, or at least inside the numbers, I would say, inside the numbers, and against tighter windows with multiple defenders in the area. Can you read the leverage and know that you got to let that ball go? And he's shown some signs of doing that. He hasn't always been super accurate there, but you can see that he sees the field the way he needs to see the field at this stage. And this is before what we're going to need to see next, because the next phase of his game, which may not come because Justin Fields will be back, but will be if, for instance, Fields weren't to come back or something to happen, say like next year, and Bagent somehow wins the job and he's playing for and he's starting for the Bears, or 2 years from now, or wherever he winds up. That next phase of starts is really when defenses have decided we're not going to play as vanilla in terms of our coverages. We may not blitz as heavily and be overly aggressive to try and rattle him, because we've seen him enough to know that he's not going to, get frazzled by that. Now we're going to start accumulating a book of things that we've scouted him for, and see if we can implement some of those things week by week. More teams will do that. And then that, after I'd say the first 6 games, teams start doing that. So from week 6 to 15, or start 6 to 15 for that player, that's when you start to see whether or not they can grow, what defenses think these players can and can't do. And then from starts 15 to 30, or whether they can grow beyond what their scouting report was and what the defenses think they can do to stop it. So I'll give you a guy who really kind of fits this conversation, and that's Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, everyone's going to look at Tyson Bagent or whoever starts, who doesn't have a high-end draft capital, and they go, is he the next Brock Purdy? I had a high grade on Brock Purdy as well. He had a higher grade than Zach Wilson, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis, Will Levis, a number of different. It was almost as high as Kenny Pickett in terms of what my grade was for Purdy pre-draft. Well, he's had 3 games where he's had multiple interceptions, 3 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, after having a sterling touchdown interception ratio. Well, it's those past 3 games, whether you're looking at it without the playoffs included or with the playoffs included, he's either that last week was his 14th start, or it was his 17th start. Either way, he's near that trough area of what I observe with young quarterbacks in terms of their rookie phase or initial phase, where teams have started to compile the book on him and say, these are things that we can kind of do to slow him down or limit him or test him. And now Purdy's going to have to play his way out of it. I think he will. And when I look at Bagent, I think the tools are there, and we're seeing that for sure. And it makes him a compelling player that, at the very worst, I think he can be a long-term journeyman player in this league who can give you bridge starts and be a first-tier backup for you. That's at the very least, I think.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy sports. Because unlike other daily fantasy platforms, PrizePicks puts you in complete control. At those other daily fantasy spots, you're setting a lineup and you're trying to compete with 1,000 other people's lineups to see if your lineup is that 1 in 1,000 to get first place and actually win you some money. But with PrizePicks, it's just you versus the house. PrizePicks sets projections for every player, and then you decide whether that player will perform better or worse than their PrizePicks projection. Like, for example, in Bears-Saints this weekend, PrizePicks has Derek Carr at 244.5 passing yards and Taysom Hill at 0.5 passing yards. So with PrizePicks, you pick 2 to 6 players and whether they will do better or worse than their PrizePicks projection, and you can win up to 25 times your money just by getting your picks right, regardless of what other people think and what their lineups look like. It's your football knowledge versus the PrizePicks projection. It's fun. It's easy. You can literally make your picks in 60 seconds or less and put your football knowledge to the test. You got to check it out for yourself. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's an extra $100 to play with at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Yeah, what do you think the lesson is there in the evaluation of somebody like Bagent? Not necessarily for you, but for everyone else. Like both Bagent and Purdy are guys that, get drafted late and instantly. It's not like, oh, they developed over the course of 4 years and then took the field and were a better quarterback than we saw in college. They were even in the preseason, we saw some of this with Bagent and of course his first start, and Purdy was the same way. Like all of a sudden these guys are right away bona fide starting caliber quarterbacks, or at least like showing the kind of traits that can lead you to be a starting caliber quarterback down the line. Like, why do you think those guys have gone undrafted? What are people missing? Or I guess Purdy was the last pick in the draft, but what are we missing in the evaluation process?
Absolutely. Quarterback's is the hardest position to evaluate, I think, in sports. And one of the difficulties of it is that we're trying to use science and analytics to study players, and it's a very important set of tools. And using a layer of that is valuable, but what can happen is teams overfit the information they get and don't understand that there's a certain place or layer for that information. It's like taking frosting and saying we're going to make an entire cake out of frosting, and there's like no cake.
But frosting is so good. But why would you more frosting?
Yeah, it's fantastic, but you probably get sick after you eat a slice. So it's like you need to be able to have that balance and need something that holds up the information and gives it context, and it gives it its proper context. And that's the thing. I mean, when you look at players like Purdy and Bagent, number one, people make models, and a lot of the models that they'll make will be about height and weight, completion percentage, wins, school that they played at, caliber of competition. And those models are easy to X out, like a lot of players who just won't fit that and probably would never do well. Like there's a player who Bagent lost to last year at the Colorado School of the Mines, John Machado. Okay. Terrific quarterback. Okay. But he's like my height, 5'11", and he's probably like 165. Okay. CFL is going to love him. Okay. As a contributor, but that it's very unlikely that a player of that weight is going to be able, and height is going to hold up well in the NFL unless they have special athletic characteristics, and he does not. So arm strength, all those things, they X out a lot. But the problem is that there's guys who may be in those schools who may have the height and weight, but not the wins, not the other things, who get kind of X'd out and washed out from that perspective. And also, we then look at quality of competition, and we have to understand that if you're watching the correct things about quarterback play, then, to me, what I've learned at least, and it's been a hard lesson for over about almost 20 years of doing this, is that if I were to define scouting, I define it carefully as it's the physical, conceptual, and technical tools that are on display, or you're evaluating those tools on display to determine whether the player can put himself or his teammates in a position to make positive plays. So that's a mouthful. But the reason I state that is that you're looking at all these skills, not to see whether they've had success with the result, but whether the process is good. And you can have plays where, Tyson Bagent, whether he played Alabama or Alabama School of the Reed Makers, you would if he's doing things within his control, in all those areas to set up his teammates for positive plays, whether they drop the ball like Velus Jones did, or whether they trip on their route like George Kittle did on the interception that he threw in the red area, and Jermaine Pratt ended up cutting off, and it was an improvised play because Kittle dropped on, basically fell down on or slipped on a shovel pass in the red area and blew up the play immediately. Whatever it is, did the player do the things that he needed to do to help himself and the team succeed, even if the success isn't there? And if the answers are resoundingly yes in all these areas, then you actually have a player who's doing well. Unfortunately, a lot of scouts look at things that are way outside the player's control, and they're variables that they can't account for, whether or not, a running back who gets 300 yards, Tevin Coleman playing at Indiana, getting 178 yards and 2 touchdowns against Ohio State, playing outside zone. I remember watching him and saying, well, he's not a good outside zone runner. And people would go, that's crazy. He played outside zone at IU. It's like, yeah, but if you watch, he was out athleting people. And the 2 runs he had against Ohio State, as an example of many games I watched, he had 2 runs that were good, and the rest were basically trash runs that would have closed up a playbook in the NFL. And when he first went to Kyle Shanahan's system in Atlanta, they had to stop running the outside zone with him because he couldn't run it. And they had to give him gap plays, which was not part of their program. But that was what he did well because he wasn't a diagnoser. And even when Kyle Shanahan wanted to bring him to the 49ers, it was short-lived. Part of it was injury, but it was fairly short-lived. He wasn't the solution. It was a bunch of, late round guys who ended up running that scheme better. So, when you look at quarterbacks, a lot of it's that. And then the final thing is processing information, which is, you're hearing more about this with these S2 tests and the AIQ. And these are good methods to try to approximate how quickly a player thinks and applies that information, but they're not doing it on the field. So it's still a layer of information that you're going to have to collect data and see where it's reliable and where it's not. It's not a magic pill. And processing information is probably still the thing on the forefront of quarterback evaluation that people are trying to learn and to get better at. And I think they're trying to use science, which makes total sense. But the problem is that quarterbacking is an improvisational performance medium, just like music, just like stand-up comedy, just like acting in some realms in terms of certain mediums of things. You have playing in practicing is one thing, playing in front of people, playing in pressure situations, and things not going right, and you having to make something out of it, or being able to make adjustments in addition to that to make the situation better, and understanding when that happens. All of that's improvisational, and it requires an integration of tools and skill sets that you're not just going to impress people on a whiteboard. You've got to be able to do that on the field. And Brett Favre, like I always talk about, Brett Favre didn't understand a nickel, but he invented the RPO, at least early in his career. And yeah, he threw a lot of interceptions, but he was a high risk type of person. Think of a comedian that you love who makes a lot of bad jokes, but the jokes that he does land are so incredibly good that he's a great comedian, but that you won't laugh at like probably 4 to 6, maybe 3 to 5 out of every 10 jokes, but the other 3 to 4 are funny, and then 2 are so funny that they make the entire night. I would say Robin Williams was probably that way to some extent. And he was known for stealing jokes. So you look at Brett Favre. I loved Robin Williams, and I love Brett Favre's game. And, we won't make any jokes about what he did in Mississippi stealing, but, maybe I just did, but this is a Bears show, so we can do that. But that's the point, is the improvisational element is hard to quantify. And there are certain things that players have to learn, that size and all the size and arm strength and wins and all those things, they overfit what it is you have to actually study. And the way you do that is on film and incrementally looking at those things.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by DoorDash. DoorDash is a great delivery service to get all of your favorites delivered right to your door. First of all, groceries, super handy. Great way for DoorDash to just bring your groceries right to your door. You don't have to go to the store, park, go in, go through. You can pick out all your groceries right on DoorDash from your favorite local grocer and have them brought right back to your door. No crowds, no waiting in the checkouts. Just have it all taken care of with DoorDash. It's also a great way to patronize some of your favorite local restaurants. Looking at DoorDash in the Chicago area, for those of you around the town, say you want some seafood, you're at home, but you don't want to get dressed up, go to the seafood place, sit down, wait for your seafood to be brought out, and then, leave and then have to do all that. You can have some great seafood from Shaw's Crab House delivered right to your door at DoorDash. They got great crab, surf and turf, surf and surf, Parmesan crusted haddock. I mean, you name it, they've got some great seafood options, and you can enjoy them from the comfort of your home with our friends at DoorDash. Right now, if you download the DoorDash app and enter in our promo code LOCKED23, you're going to get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. That's subject to change. Terms apply. Don't forget to enter that code LOCKED23 for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. So that becomes so much more challenging though from Division II level, right? When like as you said, the linebackers are the same size as the quarterback instead of now he's practicing against Tremaine Edmonds, who's 6'4", 250 pounds or whatever. Like I would imagine improvising against the Colorado School of Mines is a lot. I don't want to say a lot easier than improvising against the Las Vegas Raiders, but like it's certainly a different ballgame. But at the same time, like it is the same coverages generally. I mean, maybe the blitzes and some of the disguises get more complex at the NFL level, but like I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
How do you isolate sort of the quarterback from the competition?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked that. So few people do, and it's really the most important thing is that when you're studying players, part of it is when you're charting them and looking at their accuracy, because that's the first part when you're looking at accuracy, it doesn't matter whether it's Asante Samuel Jr. covering you or whether it's this 130-pound cornerback at Colorado School of the Mines covering your wide receiver. If you're placing the ball in the area based on where the route should be breaking, based on what the defense is doing, and the ball is where it needs to be in a pinpoint manner, then it doesn't matter who the coverage is. And this is something I learned from just observing a story that Bill Walsh told Mike Holmgren. There was way back in the day, Mike Holmgren talks about how Bill Walsh really honed in on accuracy. And Joe Montana was in practice throwing a deep post to Jerry Rice. And he got the ball to Rice. Rice made the catch, and Mike Holmgren was like, "That's a great throw, Joe." And immediately, Bill Walsh heard that and ran over to Holmgren, pulled him aside, and spent 5 minutes telling him, "Listen, don't ever tell a quarterback that that's a great throw, because on that route, the ball needs to be placed here so that he can be able to throw the ball." Or be able to run after the catch, doesn't have to leave his feet. He doesn't have to make any adjustments. It needs to be pinpoint. And for every route that you see, you have to determine where that pinpoint is. And sometimes pinpoint is a play. And this is something Walsh didn't say, but it's something that I would add to it, is that sometimes pinpoint throws aren't perfect, in stride passes. Sometimes they're back shoulder plays where you have to make an athletic adjustment, or you have to make a sliding catch and dig out the throw, because it's the only place the receiver's going to have a safe opportunity to make the catch versus the coverage and the leverage of the defender. So when you're charting plays, it's not, you have levels of that. So if you do that accurately and really stay on that strict criteria, then it doesn't matter who's covering you, because you're not looking at Sam Bradford against Colorado School of the Mines and and he threw a ball where the receiver had to turn around and catch it, but the defender's 2 yards behind him. When he's facing Dallas and he has to throw a ball and he turns around 2 yards behind him to make that catch. There's a greater chance that defenders within range to undercut the ball, knock it away, or that there's a defender over the top who's going to cream that receiver. And these are things that people are often missing or processing. Baker Mayfield's a great lesson of that. I got a lot of guff from some analysts because I had Baker Mayfield graded out as basically Jeff Garcia, as like kind of a journeyman starter who could give you Pro Bowl numbers if he had a great surrounding talent of sort of supporting cast, but not a guy who's going to lead you, as the franchise quarterback. And one of the areas that I mentioned is that accuracy is not, statistical accuracy can be very misleading, because he had great statistical accuracy in Oklahoma. But what you would notice is that it was mostly against zone. When you watched him against man-to-man, and then defenses brought pressure high up and squeezed the pocket and made him stay in the pocket and throw the ball on time, he couldn't throw the ball on time. He was often a beat or two late. And you'd see that with their feet, where they would have a hitch or a second hitch or a third or fourth hitch. And the ball might get there for the receiver to make the catch, but now the defender's on top of him and the ball's getting knocked out or defended, because now it's a much tougher play. Whereas if he actually threw the ball when he was supposed to, with a little more anticipation and based on reading the leverage and not confirming whether the receiver broke open, he would have completed that pass, and the receiver might have even turned up the field and made a lot more out of it. And people don't understand that all the time, because they're looking at the data to look at the numbers, but the data doesn't always give you that context. So when you define criteria very clearly and you're projecting it towards what you would see in NFL situations, it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect with scouting quarterbacks. I've certainly missed many, but I would say since I've started doing that, I've had success with guys like Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Brock Purdy, or Zach Wilson or Baker Mayfield on the other end of the spectrum. And I would say that you look at Bagent, and what's tough about that is, the complexity of defenses in terms of whether they're going to play hybrid coverages, on one side of the field where it's going to be zone and the other is going to be man, how they disguise stuff. That's going to be the difficult thing. But honestly, there aren't many teams in the SEC or the Big Ten that actually do that either. So when it comes down to it, if you're looking at the criteria that I mentioned, and the player does that well, and all the physical tools are there, give him you're gonna give that grade that you give him should be the same, without any plus or minuses, to the grade that you would have given an SEC, AC, or Big Ten quarterback who scored the same thing.
A lot of good lessons there. I mean, I have a lot to take away there, and forget too that the receivers he's throwing to get better a little bit too.
Yeah.
Matt, we could talk about Tyson Bagent for hours here, and I love nerding out on the draft process for you. But as we wrap up here, let everybody know, give us the elevator pitch for the rookie scouting portfolio, where they can get more of your work, and also the support you guys do for Darkness to Light and some of the cause behind it.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And, you listen to this podcast, you can see the kind of crazy depth that I go into with this. So, and I understand it's nutty, but it's the same thing. I'll just put it to you this way. The reason, Anthony Richardson and Tyson Bagent, they both worked pre-draft with a certain quarterback coach by the name of Will Hewlett, who's really well known in circles for his ability to coach players up. I contribute reports to him. He trusts my work. And the RSP is also one of the 2 most purchased draft guides for cross-checking purposes by NFL scouts, at least according to recruiting directors I know. One of them who's been vocal about that is Alex Brown over at SMU, who is the director there, and has said, meets with these guys on a regular basis, and met with them at Houston and Rice as well when he was there, and said, it's one of the 2 most purchased for that alone. If you're a fantasy player, well, I've been writing about fantasy since 2003, and I incorporate that in there where it's football rich, and you're going to learn about football, and get real football insights, but you're also going to get a fantasy point of view along with it. So you get a pre-draft that is usually 900 to 1,100 pages of content, fully bookmarked, easy to navigate on a PDF. And then along with that, for $21.95, you get a post-draft for those of you who are in fantasy talking about fit and all of that. You also I also do projections and rankings for dynasty leagues, and that's a separate product. But you can find all that at mattwaldmanrsp.com, or just go to mattwaldman.com if you just want to buy it right away. And I donate a certain percentage up to $2,000, up to $5,000 every year to Darkness to Light. They're an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children through community training. They'll train individuals, communities, universities, municipal groups, things like that. And the focus is on not only just trying to prevent this from happening and spotting, grooming tactics that are often made and dynamics that dispel oftentimes the myths that people have about the man in the van saying, hey, you want some candy, kid, but also like what happens within families and things like that people don't want to discuss because it's very uncomfortable, and understandably so. But they talk about those things as well as how to address issues when they do occur, because it's how people don't address the issue well that can compound the trauma that kids go through. And so it's an awesome organization. They're very responsible with their money. According to Charity Navigator, they've scored 100 at least for several years in a row on that, which is not always common with charities. So it's a great cause. And, I've been donating there. We've donated over, I believe we're at $60,000 since we've started donating. And for a little organization like mine, that's a niche product for you crazies out there who love football. We're very proud of that and proud of our subscribers who've helped that cause over the years.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I always want to make sure we make time to include that in there too, because it's a really important part of what you work, and it's a great organization as well. So Matt, really appreciate you joining us again, and hope to do it again soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Matt Waldman from Matt Waldman's Rookie Scouting Portfolio for joining us on the podcast today. I love talking to Matt. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. I know I did. If you had a good time, if you learned something, make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're going to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. I know normally on Fridays we'd be doing our game plan podcast, but the Waldman conversation I just think is a really good timing for this with the Tyson Bagent situation. And we got our Saints preview with Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints on Thursday's podcast. So go check that out if you have not already, and come back on Monday as we recap whatever happens in Bears Saints. Perhaps quick turnaround for the Carolina Panthers on Thursday night next week, but we'll still go back through the game and get you ready for Thursday's game as well. We are here for you each and every day to make sure that you get your daily opportunity to bear down.